just haven't been here as much lately. I actually was following last week, watching that online.
One second. Yeah, I thought it was incoming.
We can do it at 5.
On. All right. Welcome to the Independence City Council study session for Monday, June 11th, 2018. Our first presentation is on the former Alice Chalmers site blight study.
Right.
Mr. City Manager.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you.
Deputy City
It's a pleasure to be here tonight trying to fill in for our City Manager, Zach Walker. Regarding the first item on the agenda, you'll remember that several weeks back, the council directed that we conduct a blight study on the former Alice Chalmers site. So that has been done. And so if, with your permission, we'd like to invite Community Development Director Tom Scannell up to the podium to give the council a summary of that report.
Good evening, mayors and members of the council, Mayor Pro Tem. My name is Tom Scannell. I'm the Community Development Director. As Mark had mentioned, I'll fill you in on the former Alice Chalmers blight study that was recently completed. So the city hired development initiatives to determine if the site would meet the definition of blight under the Missouri state statutes. They performed a detailed field survey of the site, documenting the existing conditions of the building as well as the improvements on site. They gathered a significant amount of data both from the city as well as Jackson County. This data included building permits, code enforcement, police and fire calls, business licensing, as well as gathering GIS data. I do want to point out that there were no interior inspections done of the subject property, so everything was done outside the building. Just to orient everyone, the site is located at the southwest corner of Pacific Avenue and Pleasant Street and is highlighted on the map. It's about a half mile south of the square. The site totals just under 25 acres and is owned by 4 entities, 3 of which are related. The surrounding area is largely residential, with scattered commercial and institutional uses nearby. Go into a little bit of the history on the site. The site has a long history dating back to 1908 when the Danielson Plow Company opened its doors in celebration of the new building on site. The company manufactured riding and walking plows and continued to do so through approximately 1916 when the building and the surrounding land was sold to the Gleaner Combine Harvester Corporation. The map in the lower left corner is a Sanborn map from 1907. It shows the Danielson Plow Company factory there. The image in the lower right is kind of a blow-up of the approximate size of that building. Continuing on with the history, Gleaner experienced continued success and continued to manufacture combines at the subject property through 1955 when Alice Chalmers acquired Gleaner. Alice Chalmers continued to manufacture combines at the property through 1985, when it merged with Deutz AG and became the Deutz Alice Corporation. Deutz Alice eventually rebrands into AGCO in 1991. And as the downturn in the agricultural equipment market continued through the 1990s, the company closed the Independence manufacturing facility in 2000 and moved its operation to Heston, Kansas. Since 2000, the site has been largely vacant, with scattered small businesses and manufacturing uses. The image in the lower right is the 1926 Sanborn map, and it identifies the Gleaner Corporation facility on that map. State statute identifies a number of factors that contribute to a property meeting the definition of blight. On the screen are several of those factors that the report found to support the site meeting that definition. I will spend some time going through each one of those. So the first factor is age. The structures were initially constructed in the early 1900s and continued to be added on through the years. The average structure age within the property is presently unknown. However, it can be assumed to be at least 50 to 60 plus years of age. Typical useful lifespans for building components range anywhere from 5 to 30 years based on the use, function, and location. It was noted that various building systems are deteriorating without an ongoing building maintenance program and regular repair. This is particularly relevant due to the vacancy of a significant portion of the structure. We have a couple pictures on the screen. The picture on the left shows what remains of the Gleaner combine sign. You can see the deterioration of the exterior surfaces as well as on the windows and glass and masonry. The picture on the right shows an outmoded electrical service that appears to be vacant. Continuing on with age, we have some pictures here. The picture on the left kind of shows the lack of facility maintenance. The photo on the right also shows that, where you have overgrown vegetation that's coming through a stairway. Obsolescence is another blighting factor. This is a condition that can often be caused with the advanced age of a facility. The report found that the following conditions have contributed to a functional obsolescence. We have outdated site improvements, deteriorated building facades, vacant or underutilized parcels, the existence of unsanitary and unsafe conditions, including illegal dumping, overgrown weeds and standing water. We have a lack of good lighting in certain areas, as well as a significant portion of the building being vacant. On the screen, we have two pictures. The picture on the left shows an abandoned rail spur that serves a loading dock on the southern part of the site. And the photo on the right shows an unmaintained receiving area in kind of the north central part of the site. Here are some more pictures of obsolescence. We have, again, another abandoned rail line shown in both of these pictures. One's on the north central part, and the other one also is in the north central part. Both of those have since been abandoned, even though the rail lines or the rail tracks are still there. Within the property, many of the existing improvements were designed in an era which does not accommodate current building and design standards and codes. In fact, many of the existing improvements don't meet current industrial and manufacturing standards. During the on-site investigation and field survey, development initiatives found the following conditions that lead to inadequate and outmoded designs. They include incomplete street network, irregular intersections and dead-end streets. You have poor vehicular access and internal circulation within the site. We have non-functioning and obsolete rail lines. And due to the historic nature of the improvements, the general layout of and design of the improvements don't conform to modern use and make rehab difficult. So as a result, inadequate and outmoded design can make it difficult to attract new development to that site, is what the consultant found. We have 3 pictures here. Kind of in the upper left, we have an unused cooling tower. In the upper right, we have existing surface stormwater that's present on the northern side of the property. That structure leads the water back to the building, so it's collecting the water off the parking lot and directing it back to the building. And then the picture in the lower right again shows another abandoned rail line that served the property at some point. All right, throughout the property, there are numerous improvements that are showing signs of physical deterioration. These include deteriorated surface on parking lots, deteriorated curb and gutter improvements, deteriorated sidewalk improvements, deteriorated primary building structures. These are things like roofs, walls, foundations, as well as secondary structures such as fascias, soffits, gutters, downspouts, windows, doors, fire escapes, as well as exterior structures where you have mechanical equipment, loading areas, fences, walls, and other structures that are all showing signs of deterioration. And we have a fire damage structure. This fire occurred back in 2010, and that building is still on site. We have a couple pictures here showing some of the parking lots that show the cracking and spalling, and at some point they attempted to patch the property or patch the parking lot. These 2 pictures here show, again, some of the vegetation that has grown up along some of the stairways leading from one parking lot down to the building, as well as the entry gate system on the north side. You can see how that's non-functioning. Continuing along, the picture in the upper left shows the exterior wall system where you have cracks and spalding. The upper right is just one example of boarded up windows on site, and the picture on the lower is one of the overhead doors that has some damage where it's deflecting in on itself. Picture in the upper right shows missing downspouts. You have water that's getting behind the brick. It's causing it to spald and break apart. The picture in the upper right, you have a electrical panel that is no longer attached to the side of the building. And you have the lower picture, which is showing one of the loading areas where you can see the damage from that, as well as some overgrown vegetation and some trash thrown in there. Some more pictures showing damage to some of the structures, as well as the upper right and the lower picture showing some pictures of the building that was damaged in that fire from 2010. In its present condition, the site is primarily accessed off of Pacific Avenue on the north, Cottage Street on the west, and Linden Avenue on the south. Access off of Pacific requires users to cross a rail line. This rail line gets used. Internal access within the site is also limited. So in order to get from the northern portions of the site, one has to exit the property drive along the street, re-enter the property at their intended location. Conditions typically associated with meeting the definition of blight include unsanitary or unsafe conditions, which can include the existence of trash and debris, weeds and overgrown vegetation, poorly lit areas, graffiti, or any other condition believed to be unsafe. There are several locations within the site that exhibit these unsafe and unsanitary conditions. The most prevalent being poorly lit areas and property code violations. So poorly lit areas are prevalent throughout the site, particularly in the southern and northern portions. Again, this kind of goes back to an era when the site was developed. Lighting must not have been a thing that was provided. On the environmental assessment, the consultant did not do an environmental assessment. However, based on the age of the structure and the use within that structure, it could be reasonably assumed that there's some presence of environmental hazard there. But again, just wanted to qualify that the consultant did not do environmental assessment. As I previously mentioned, data was gathered from the Independence Police Department. This data indicated that crimes specific to structure within the properties were minimal. The records indicated that 17 total police calls were made within a 6-month time period. That's from 2012 to 2018. I'm sorry, 6-year time period from 2012 to 2018. So calls average about 3.4 per year. However, most of the service calls, 10 of the 17, were for false alarms. However, of those actual legitimate calls, they included prowlers or trespassing, disturbance, medical call, abandoned auto, theft, accident, or stolen auto. So similar to the police data, the consultant also gathered our code enforcement data dating back to 2008. It was noted that the property had been inspected many times, notified the owner, cited, and they faced legal action as a result of various and ongoing property code violations. The violations ranged from simple maintenance issues to more serious building code or building violations. One of the things to note is scattered throughout the property are numerous locations of illegally dumped trash. Much of the materials are located in areas which aren't secured and not readily visible, so kind of out of sight, out of mind. And that picture on the screen is just one of the examples of trash and brush pile that was dumped, I think, in the northern central portion of the property. These 4 pictures also show illegal dumped brush. That's on the northern portion. That's the picture in the upper left. Picture in the upper right shows parked and stored vehicles there. Several of these appear to be abandoned or unused. The lower left, again, you have parked and stored semi-trailers. Again, this is on the northern part of the site where the gate is usually open. And the picture in the lower right shows a porta-john operation where they're storing those out there, as well as parked and stored vehicles. These 3 pictures, the upper left shows, again, more trash just thrown about. The upper right, you got some building materials there and some other trash. And the lower picture shows some tires that are being dumped there as well. So the report finds that the property would meet the definition of blight as defined by Missouri state statutes. Many of the improvements appear to be largely original to the date of construction of the various portions of the facility. These improvements show an indication that some of the life safety components may need to be updated due to age, obsolescence, or neglect. The improvements within the property are mostly original and estimated again to be over 50 to 60 plus years of age. They're showing signs of deterioration. Based on all of this, the consultant development initiatives found that the site also suffers from inadequate street layout, unsanitary and unsafe conditions, and overall deterioration of site improvement. So that's kind of an overview of the blight study and available for any questions.
Who's going first? Go ahead.
Thank you for that report. It sounds like it's pretty much a mess out there. And we don't even know what's inside, so it could be even a lot worse.
Mm-hmm.
You said of the 4 parcels, 3 are related.
Mhm.
So can you tell us who the owner is? Or who the owners are, because somebody owns the 4th parcel as well.
Yeah, so the 3 related entities, and we use that because they have the same mailing address, is the LDS Church Real Estate Division, Church of Jesus Christ, Corporation of the President Bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ, and then the 4th owner, who's unrelated, is 523 LLC. So those are the 4 entities.
Okay.
The first 3 all have the same mailing address.
Okay, so those are the ones that have paid the fines when there's a problem in the past?
Wherever the code violation was found, whether that was found on
Which property was found?
which property, correct.
So is it very likely that there's probably some contamination with some other things inside the buildings, Tom? Or I know that's conjecture at this point, but do we have any recourse as to, I know we probably have some recourse as to the exteriors,
Mm-hmm.
but if there's a lot of contamination inside, do we have any recourse?
I know on the exterior, like we said, we have our codes in place. On the interior, when there is redevelopment at this site, those items would have to be addressed. And the appropriate parties brought in to make sure that everything was followed.
Are there any state or federal funds available for blighted areas within cities like this?
There's incentives, through TIF, CID, 353, TDD, NIDS of course. We'd have to do some research to see what type of state and federal grants there would be to clean those up.
And there's several businesses operating out of one of those sites, right?
Yeah, the businesses are kind of scattered throughout there, and we estimate probably less than 20% of the overall building is occupied through the handful of businesses that are operating out of that location. Some are in kind of the central part. We have the rail car kind of, that business is on the Pleasant Street side, and then we have a couple other businesses on the Cottage Street side.
Thank you.
Councilman Ford?
Thank you. So what's our next step? We understand this is blighted. I think we all are in agreement with that.
Mm-hmm.
This has been a property that we've looked at for off and on for 20 years of what we're going to do with. I mean, this is something that's kind of the heart of our historic area next to the RLDS church, to the historic Independence Square. So what's our next step?
Yeah, this is right in the tourist area. You know, it's just south of the square. You have the Truman Depot there. You have the Bingham Wagner. You have the Trails Museum there. So it's a perfect location within there. We would work through the city manager's office as far as next steps. What we just wanted to do was to present the information to the city council, get that information out there.
Well, it's out here, thank you. So I would be curious to see what our next step is. What are we gonna do to prod the LDS Church to take a strong look at this site? It's 25 acres right in the middle of our downtown, if you will. What's gonna be our land usage for that in the future? I mean, that's some if cleaned up properly, that's 25 acres of some prime land. That would be great to utilize, if not leave as a green space. Is there any sort of time frame to move with them or notify them? I'm sure they've been notified now that this has been designated as a blight by the City of Independence. Is there something that we do to go to the state to notify them that this is dedicated as a blighted area, to put more pressure with them,
Well,
the LDS Church to clean this up?
Well, the study found that it would meet the definition of blight. So there's been no blight finding on this property. The report just said, hey, it does meet the definition. But there are steps that, and I'll let Mark kind of.
Right. Well, you know, I think tonight the mission was just to make you aware of this report, and many of the incentives that Tom was talking about, they require a blight determination to really even get started. So there's a lot of things we could do, and we weren't really trying to propose a way forward right this minute. We wanted to make you aware of this information, and then we feel like the council will be giving us further direction on how you want us to proceed going forward.
I'd like to proceed to get it cleaned up. So I guess us as a council, do we need to give you direction to give us options on what we need to do? Is that what you want to
That'd
hear
be
from
very
us tonight?
appropriate if you would.
Okay, well, I think it would. Go ahead, Councilwoman DeLucy.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Mayor, before we do anything, I think that we have to find out, before we do anything, I think we should find out what is the cost of remediation. And I think the cost of remediation depends on our proposed use. For example, if we're going to use a section of it for a parking lot, then we don't need to dig all the contaminated dirt out. We can pretty much pave over it. But if we wanted to use it for example, a restaurant or a museum where people will be eating, then a lot more remediation has to occur. And I don't know that because we're not an owner and we haven't been asked to make a finding of blight by the owners, I don't know that we can direct anything at this point, other than I really want to know how much remediation is going to cost and what federal or state funds are available to us, because I don't want to bite off something that we just can't swallow.
Well, I'm not suggesting or proposing at all that we put any city funds in this. We don't own any of that. But however, with the stance this council's taken over the past 2 years, trying to clean up as much of the blight as possible, I think this is a 25-acre right smack dab in the middle of our city blight.
Yep.
And
Yep.
So, Tom, what's a development initiative? How do you hire a development initiative?
They are a consultant that.
So we hired somebody to go down and look at this place,
Mhm.
and they're, what you're telling us, I could look at that place and tell you it's blight.
Mhm.
How much could I make?
Mhm.
Mayor,
Never mind, don't answer that.
Mayor Pro Tem,
So, there's existing businesses there.
Correct.
And do we go in and inspect those businesses?
The fire department does their routine interior.
I mean, any business
inspections.
gets inspected.
That's correct.
Don't they? I mean, if you have a lawyer's office, they come in and see whether or not you're sprinklers are working.
Mhm.
I mean, are these places that are there in a blighted area?
It meets the definition of blight based on Missouri state statute. That's what the consultant found.
So they're operating, and I know that this is, they're operating in a blighted area.
Mhm.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Councilman Robertson.
What I would recommend that we consider as a council is to ask the city manager's office to maybe start a dialogue with the owners, the property owners. The people that are renting those places obviously can't do anything about it because they don't own the property either. We don't own the property, but I think we should actually start or initiate a dialogue with the property owners about some remediation, whether they continue to own it and remediate it, or whether they do something about giving the property away or doing something with the property to somebody that's going to actually take care of the blight. So I think the first place to start is to approach the property owners. And I would ask the city council to consider coming to a consensus and asking the
I
city
hardly
manager
think
to do that.
I mean, if I own that land, I don't want to come to you and ask you to call it a blight. I mean, I think Councilman Perkins' suggestion that we follow with instructions to clean it up, to see what the next position is. As a council, we want it to look and be. I don't think that any one of us is suggesting that we, don't have a conversation with the owners, but we have considered that it is blighted. That part's done, right?
Mr. Mayor Pro
Yes.
Tem, I would concur with Councilman Robertson that we should have dialogue there with the fact that we direct our city manager's office to start that dialogue, time frame of possible cleanup. And also, I would like to have some information myself to see what we're looking at, what's the dollar amount. I'm not saying by any means that the city should put any money into this program at all for remediation cleanup in any form, but the dialogue needs to be started, and I would strongly urge that we use language this is an urgent matter. I mean, it's no longer time to let this area be sitting there being a blight. I think we have plenty of showing of record how we're taking our blighted properties in the city serious, that we need to convey that to the property owners. That
I agree.
sound right?
Yeah, agreed. That's what,
How much have we spent to find out it was blighted? I mean, we've already invested money. You don't have to go there. I don't want to put you on the line here. But I mean, that's what we did. We spent money to find out it was blighted. What's the next step? They know, I know, you know, it's blighted.
Well, having this determination does give us a way forward, and we can come back with options if that's what you'd like to know, what the next steps might be, and then you can give us further direction from that point. So
Okay, the
this was a
next
good step
steps
forward.
in twofold. One, to clean up. Two, to talk to the owners.
Right, we can let
Is
you know.
that clear, or do you need other direction?
That'd be fine.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you. Our next presentation is the Independence Fire Department Incident Response Assessment. Mr. City Manager?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. This next item on the agenda is really kind of a two-for-one bargain, because we're going to have two presentations combined into one, because Fire Chief Short, in an effort to be respectful of your time, has put two together. So in addition to hearing a presentation about the Fire Department Incident Response Assessment. He's also going to wrap that up with a little report on the Emergency Preparedness Program. So without further ado, with your permission, we'll have Fire Chief Short give that presentation.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, council members, thank you for having me up here tonight. Again, I'm going to be kind of brief into this just because, you know, your time is valuable, but I kind of wanted to give you an update on, you know, the first thing that I'll talk about here is our response assessment. As you know, we are becoming more and more busy every day as a fire department. So it has come time for us to really look at what we're doing and how we're doing it and start to make some determinations that we're doing it the best that we can. Essentially, when we first started this process, we formed a committee about 2 years ago. That committee is made of both labor and management members to look at our incident responses and how we respond to those things. That committee looked at a lot of data. They looked at a lot of situations or scenarios at which we can become more efficient in what we do. None of them are easy or simple answers or ones that we necessarily always like, but we know for one thing for sure in everything that we looked at over those 2 years is there are things that we really have to consider in order to be better as a fire department. So that committee essentially sat down for those 2 years, looked at the data, tried to determine what would be the best way to move that plan forward. They brought some recommendations forward to the Labor Management Committee and to myself, and from there we've kind of looked at a plan or a solution for us to start working on. First thing I want to do though is just talk briefly on a little bit about why we're at where we're at. Some brief statistical things. Just 3 real things that probably stand out more than anything. The first statistic here that we look at is our incident alarms, the amount of incidents we have in a year. What I gave is kind of a graph here over a 10-year period, and what you'll see in that graph is that in 2007 we had approximately 14,316 calls. In 2017, 10 years later, we're already up to 20,928 calls. That's a 32% increase in 10 years that we've seen in our incident responses. Just to bring out the highest level of those responses, that next little statistic there in 2007 was 9,038 calls were EMS related. And then just last year, we were up to 13,064. Again, approximately 31% increase in EMS or emergency medical service alarms. Even during that time period, we did some things as a department to reduce that. We reduced going to nursing homes and care facilities where first response was really already there. But even after doing that, we still see this increase occurring in our emergency medical services. Why? A lot of it has to do with our aging generational gaps that are coming up. You know, what we're looking at as far as the age of our population moving forward. So that's going to increase it. Overall, EMS comprises about 60 to 63%, somewhere in there, of our overall incident responses that we have. And that's not even transport. That's just doing a first response to those emergency medical services. So another thing that we look at when we're trying to look at how we respond to things is our time measurement, our response times. Basically, there's 2 ways you can look at response times. One is an NFPA standard, which is National Fire Protection Association, that kind of talks about what would be the optimal way to look at your time element. And that is to look at it in percentiles. And the goal is always to try to be at the 90th percentile. In other words, you want to see your time or your response time that you can hit in 90% of the time. So in 90% of our calls, we would like to be in that 6-minute and 20-second time period. And that's the goal we always shoot for. That's our dashboard goal, as you've seen in your council strategic plan. But really where we're at is we're around that 8-minute mark as we look at it quarterly. For overall, last year it was 8 minutes and 15 seconds. Remember, that's 90 percentile. So really, if you want to say, okay, what does it take to get to the 6 minutes and 20 seconds? Well, right now, we're doing it about 75% of the time. So it's not there all the time. But then you can look at the other statistic, which is average. And our average response time is at about 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Now, why is that so much lower? Well, it's statistics. So when you're looking at averages, you're looking at your highest and your lowest, and you come somewhere in the middle. While it looks good, it's not always a direct reflection of how well your response might be, or how you can do better in your response. So that's another thing that we've looked at in this. The next thing that we look at is, what's it actually doing to our companies or our apparatus? In 2017, what I've put up here statistically for you to see is basically our 4 busiest companies that we have, our 4 busiest pumpers. They're running anywhere from 29, almost 3,000, up to 3,600 calls per year as one company. Okay, so Station 1, Pumper 1 is running over 3,600 calls a year. That's significant, and I'll give you a little statistic here following this, but really what we're looking at is the majority of these high-level companies are going to be on the west end of our city. They're going to be 1, 3, which are in District 1, and then 5 and 2, which are in 4 and part of District 3. And of course, Station 1 is also in part of District 2, Council District 2. Now, just because I didn't put the other 10 up there doesn't mean they're not running any calls. They're just not as significant with the point that I'm going to make here. And that point is that TriData, who is a statistical company that does a lot of governmental analysis of data, looked at data when it related to fire departments back in, I believe it was 87, or this may have even been a newer study. But essentially what they're saying is that if you have companies that are running 2,000 to 3,000 calls a year, they're in what's called a response effect that's high. That means there is a very high probability that they're going to have overlapping calls, okay? Which means that if they're out on a call, that means there may be an additional call inside their district at the same time. Well, what that means for us is somebody else has to cover it. One of the other stations then has to cover that. It also relates to the fact that we start to slow down some of our response time objectives when we have that overlapping of calls. And then we also see some of the efficiencies and the effectiveness of the personnel themselves that start to decrease because they are on those calls so much of their time that in a 24-hour period at which our firefighters work, that's difficult for them to run call after call after call after call for them to be able to handle that. So it does fatigue the crews. And then we get into the very high, which again just builds on that. You know, you have a very high probability that there's an overlapping of calls. You have a very high probability that you're moving from other areas to cover these calls. So those effects become even stronger or even more of a problem that you'll be dealing with in your department. So if you look at where we're at right now, we have 4 companies, 4 of the 14 companies that are in that high category, with 2 more that are within a couple hundred calls away of being in that category as well. And we have 3 of our companies that are in that very high category, approaching as well that extremely high category with 1 of them. So it's important that we really sit down and look at what we can do to bring that down because, again, probably to point out is it's not just about the response time, it's about my personnel, making sure that when they're on those calls, they can be the best that they can be when they're there and they're just not fatigued and exhausted from just running call after call after call. So it's important for us to look at it. So just to give you a brief overview of what we have right now, we currently have 10 stations, which have 10 pumpers, 2 trucks, and 2 rescues at each one of those stations. In the staffing for those, in the minimum staffing, our pumpers have 3 personnel, our trucks have 2 personnel, and our rescues have 2 personnel at this point. Okay, so in a day's time, our minimum staffing is somewhere around 38 to 39 personnel. This is the process, or this is what we've been doing since 1987. It's not changed. So even in the 10 years that we've seen the 30% increase, we've not changed what we do. Our stations are in the same places. Our apparatus is the same. Our staffing levels are the same. We've not made any changes in those. So again, something that we have to look at in the future to be more efficient, because as we get busier and busier, it's going to be more difficult for us to handle those calls to the best that we can for our citizens.
Chief?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem, as you're talking about staffing, I always found it amazing talking about Station 3 now, how they can go from their location to run a call up north of 24 Highway around Fairmont Park in that area.
Right.
Surely that's got to take some time. It's going to slow that response time down.
Yeah, and that's actually, and that's has a lot to do with it, is station locations. You know, that we have some component, or we have some areas in our districts, you know, Station 3s, Station 5s, that are those little outlier areas. Even Station 9, which has probably the biggest of all the districts, you know, when you look out around 7 Highway and all of that area that's out on the east side that's covered, there's some long distances there that bring that time element up for us.
Do you have any statistics? You don't have to give them now, but I would be curious to see what Station 3 runs on the north side of 24 Highway.
We can give you any statistic
I
you
bet
think
you
you. We've got a very strong data system that gives us our time elements,
I
and
would love to see that.
all the way down to each station has different quadrants as well, so we can break that down quite a bit.
Thank you.
Okay, so some of the challenges that we have, of course, as I've just kind of already been hitting, is that our calls for service are growing and our apparatus and personnel aren't. In other words, we're taking on more and still doing it with what we have at this point. Our excessive calls for service are fatiguing our personnel, which of course is potential for safety issues, injury issues, things of that nature that we need to really look at. We're seeing increasing response times. Or not even so much that it's increasing, it's just definitely not getting better. And then we're also going to see probably in the future that our population density is going to start to shift. In other words, those call areas are going to start to change a little bit. I don't know, almost a year ago, Mid-America Regional Council came in and talked about the demographics of Independence and how the baby boomer generation is going to change the density, and we're going to start to see more calls more towards that 291 and 40 highway area. So eventually we're going to start to see that shift, and that's going to take a toll, because really I think what's going to happen is we're not going to see a shift. We're just going to see those areas booming as well as the ones that currently do, so that we have to deal with that. So here's what we had to look at. What are our solutions? The first thing we wanted to put on the board was we wanted to say there's things we can do right now with the resources we have. It's not the best thing that we can do, but it makes us a little more efficient, and it's something we can start with. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those. Some of the first ones are some things we can do and that we are going to do here probably in just, some of it's already started, some of it moving forward pretty quickly. The first thing is we're going to have an upgrade to our computer-aided dispatch. That's currently in the process. It's pretty much done. It's just a little bit of troubleshooting. This is an important component to a lot of the things that we're trying to do. We had to change that technology, that software, to make it a little more friendly to the types of things we wanted to do in our operations. As with all software, it gets antiquated. That was becoming antiquated. There was a lot of newer types of things that could be done that we couldn't do with that software. So this was a build-up for a lot of the other things that we're doing. It helps us do things like improve the selection of appropriate apparatus. In other words, it's going to make sure the right apparatus are going. Not that the right apparatus weren't going before, but probably maybe units that were closer could have been going. Okay, and right now it's just doing it with the normal selection and using the normal data that we have as far as our districting. The next thing that we can do is we can start to do some load sharing. In our multi-company stations, Station 1, Station 2, we have the ability with the new software to load share. In other words, there's 3 companies at each one of those. There's a truck, there's a rescue, and a pumper. What we can start to do is to let them share the load a little bit more between those 3 companies. Yes, they all have specific jobs that they do, but they also, when it comes to EMS and 60% of our calls, they all have that capability. So they're going to share a little bit of that load. It still won't bring those numbers down in Station 1 and Station 2, but it can help a little bit as a start. It's a start for us. The next thing that we'll look at is that we're including, and this again comes from our CAD upgrade, is it allows us to prioritize some of our calls. In other words, we have some non-emergency calls that in the past our system really didn't allow us to say it's not an emergency. That when an apparatus was assigned to it, the system didn't recognize if something more important came in and would kick that closer unit off of it. This system will. Kind of just some examples, or probably the biggest one is our lift assist. We go out a lot and we help citizens get up. Now, it's not that it's not an emergency, it's always their emergency, and we recognize that. But when something more critical comes in, and we're still going to send somebody to them. It's just now it's going to be a little bit longer to get them to them. It's going to come from a farther way so that we can make sure that closer unit is going to the higher priority type of call that we're in there. Again, something that our new system is going to allow us to do. Our next set of solutions that we start to look at, these are things that probably in the next 6 to 12 months we'll be working on. Again, as we do all of these, we're going constantly back through the data to make sure that the changes we're making are the right changes and that there's not something else that we can do. One of the next things that we'll do will be an upgrade to our mobile data terminals. Currently, we have mobile data terminals in the trucks. We're going to go to a new system, which is called, again, it's through our Tyler New World, but we're going to what's called CrewForce, which is an iOS app, an Apple application. What it'll do is it gives us a lot more opportunities for the type of information we can get through the MDTs, as well as it provides us another component, which is the next one. It provides us some GPS data that our system can actually do, and we can do what's called proximity sharing or proximity dispatch. What that means is that the CAD system or the computer-aided dispatch system automatically can determine by where the CAD is or where those apparatus are, who the actual closest unit is. So that, you know, if Station 1, Pumper 1 is on a call and another call comes in that district, it can determine based on where the other pumpers might be if they're not in station, who's the closest. So, and it'll send that closest unit. We probably won't see a big effect on our first run units. It'll be when those second calls come out that we'll really see probably the better result of that priority dispatch, because it's going to get those second units out there faster. Another potential or another solution that we looked at, we're going to convert one of our pumpers to include a lot of the rescue capabilities. We have the 2 rescues, and basically those rescues have specialized rescue equipment, extrication equipment, and other specialized equipment. We're going to convert one of our pumpers that's on the east side of town to hold that equipment as well. That way, since our rescues are more centrally located, that gives us a little bit of coverage on the east side as well. And then finally, one of the last solutions that we'll try to do is, again, we go back and we look at this data, and if we see we're not getting a good enough effect, then we're going to look at the possibility of relocating the rescues themselves to maybe a station at Station 3 or Station 5 or Station 7, depending on how this data starts to change or how we start to see the shift in this. Again, it's something that while it's not completely set in stone, we're going to continue to look at it to make sure that we can do the most efficient thing we can with the resources we have. Okay, so that's what we can do, but really what it's going to boil down to is what you as the council are going to have to think about in the future, is how can we do a better job of providing that service. And it's going to require some things. And when I say future, I don't mean next week. You know, we'll give you a couple weeks to think about how you're going to add these on. No. We know it could take a while, but it has to be on the radar because we're going to get farther and farther behind the ball on this. We're going to have to look at some things like the aerial apparatus that we have, and do we have an adequate amount, and are they positioned in the right places? Where that's a factor is commercial business, making sure those things are available in our commercial business areas, as well as residential. It's there because of rescue, but when we have high rises, it's imperative that we have these. It's part of our fire protection rating to have that. We have to look at our pumpers and rescues. We have to look at not only the personnel that we have on them, do we have an adequate number in the city, and are our stations in places where we're putting them in the right place, where we can get them out to the people fast enough. We'll have to look at that. In the past, with our last tax, we basically, rather than look at relocating stations, we put them pretty much where they were for the ones that were built, and we remodeled. But now we're really going to have to look in the future. Are they going to have to move to some different locations? Probably our next couple that we have to deal with is Station 5, which is on 35th and Sterling approximately, and Station 8, which is out by our Newtown Harmony area. We're going to have to look at whether those are going to be inadequate places. Our Station 8 was built in '64. We're just about to the point where they don't make a fire truck that'll fit in the doors anymore. So it's definitely going to have to be looked at as well. And then we may even have to look in the future at whether just medical response units are a part of this response as well. Again, they're all things that we're going to have to consider, but really it's going to boil down to, can we put the funding behind them to get those things to go forward? Okay, any questions on that?
Mayor Pro Tem. I already got some thoughts and ideas cooking up in the head here, so if you can give me some of those statistics about Station 3 up north there, that would, going up north of 24 Highway.
Can I give them to you for every station so that you can see that it's not just a Station 3 area issue?
I want to stay focused on 3.
Okay.
Right? No,
I understand.
No, I understand
Yes,
where you're coming from,
Yeah.
but I think it would tie in good with some thoughts I have. Concern that I have, a lot of our industry is underground. How are we able to fight any industrial fire that's underground, and how does our radio frequencies work underground? Are our men and women that go under there, are they safe?
No.
Are they able to? Did I hear you say
Let
no?
me say no. Yes, they're safe
Okay.
when they, but is it the optimal thing that we have right now? No. Right now, communications is almost impossible. We have to be able to communicate by line of sight. So if we have a apparatus that's all the way in the back of the cave, we have to have several apparatus positioned in the cave just to get that communication all the way outside. Reason why is because communications is not part of the fire code. So it's never been addressed in the caves to have communication systems put in there. Some Kansas City does have that as a code change, which they required communications in all of their cave access, which basically a repeater system through those entire areas. So yeah, they're a challenge. I mean, our firefighting capabilities in the caves are a very high challenge, and they're high risk essentially. The good thing is they are all sprinklered in our city, so we at least have that.
How often are you there running an emergency call like that you would have to have that type of redundancy?
Statistically, I couldn't tell you. I mean, we probably, when it comes to automatic alarms, which we run more than anything else, we're probably running those, I would say 3 to 4 times a month, which when it's an automatic alarm, we don't know it's an emergency until we're all the way in there to know for sure, unless we get a call maybe. We'll run medical calls in there once, twice maybe in a month, so we do have some response into there. Just all of them are different, each one of the caves is set up just a little bit different in how much we go to there. I mean, the good thing, again, with sprinkler systems, that reduces a lot of our fire damage that occurs in those, because it knocks it down pretty quick, so in most situations.
I'll make sure you guys are safe when they're there, because there's a
Yeah.
lot of square footage underground. I don't
Oh,
think
yeah.
a lot of our residents truly realize how much is underground.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Councilman Roberts.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very well thought through. I appreciate the input and the suggestions on what we need to look at for the future, because there's a lot to consider. I think some of the, even though all of our caves in Independence are sprinklered, some of them go under the city line into Sugar Creek or into Blue Springs right now, both, I think, out on 7. So, but I think they're all sprinklered, even the ones in Sugar Creek and Blue Springs.
The part, well,
Aren't they?
yeah, our part is sprinklered. The part that is considered inside the city limits is
Is that
sprinklered.
right? It's not
Yes.
required in the other 2 cities?
No, well, in Blue Springs, yes, those
Blue
are
Springs.
sprinkled. But the one cave that goes across the city limits to Sugar Creek,
Is
the part is in Independence is required to be sprinkled.
Okay. Okay, thanks. The other question I had, so we don't know about.
Which, by the way,
rest.
is the part we have to drive through to get to.
Right, right. So the other question I had was under the heading Solutions 2, you talked about converting some of the pumpers to rescue and possible relocation of the rescues. So with this new software and the new dispatch, are you suggesting that some of the calls now, since we'll know a little bit better detail about what those calls are for, are you going to send just a rescue instead of the whole fire truck apparatus, like most of the calls have both now, don't they?
Well, I mean, really what that equates to is as we shift the load on this side, on the west side of the city, and the rescues might have to pick up some of that load on EMS calls, we still need to have those special rescue capabilities. So rather than convert a pumper to a rescue, we still want that pumper, we still want that fire
Right.
protection as well. We can add that equipment to that pumper, and they can pick up a little bit of the calls that the rescues would run on the east side of the town.
So they could go to 2
So
different
we're not
calls, is
really
what you're
getting
saying.
rid of anything.
Right.
Everything's staying the same. We're just adding a little bit more capability to those pumpers.
But what you're saying is you could send the fire truck and the rescue to 2 different locations at the same time, is what you're
Right.
saying. Cover 2 at the same time.
Right.
Thanks. Good.
Same amount of land,
Same amount of land.
less people? I mean, we went from 4 to 5, or?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not sure what the
You're
population was
right,
back in
okay.
'87,
And
but
more calls,
yeah.
all right. Having some background, the alarm in Kansas City, I mean, the person on site is always the most accurate, right? All I want to do, if I may, they can call off, that this isn't that when the captain gets there and sees, or, whatever the drivers could, but just relying on, and forgive me, software to make a decision. I really, the first-hand information is always I had found to be best. And, excuse me, go right ahead.
Our captains have that authority.
Okay.
We give them that
They'll
authority to
override.
be situationally aware of everything that's going on around them. So if the software recommends something, but they have that situational awareness that something else is going on, they have the authority to make that kind of decision.
Communication is what you.
Yeah, we're not stopping any communication process that we've had in place.
And
That-
the
that's
ones
still
that are
there.
there can be overridden
Right.
if it is a decision. And
Right.
I know human error is just like software error, but given the choice, I'd rather have the dedicated people that know the situation
Yep.
calling the shots. Anybody else?
We're not taking that out of their hands. We're just trying to make it a little easier for them.
One thing I haven't seen, you haven't said anything in here about another fire station at all. I was always under the understanding out at 40 in the area south out here, it's the worst response time of the whole place. It's not even
Yeah,
directed here
when
for
I
the
say
future.
add a pumper, that's what it's gonna boil down to. If we're gonna add a pumper, it's
That
gonna have to
fits?
come with a new house. to put it quite simply.
Bumper
I
that
mean,
fits in.
we can put more trucks in stations, and that's good. I mean, for some areas, that may be the necessary thing for us to do, but there's some place that's the only way to add the pumper is we're gonna have to add a station. Yeah, the 40 Highway 291 area, that is becoming an area that we have to really have our eyes open on.
And what about 40 and Norfleet out in that area? What do you have out there?
And that's
Part of
another
it?
one, and that's where we gotta look at, is the current Station 5 really in the right place? You know, is its location really the right place now? And that's the thing, back when some of those stations were built, they were probably in the right places, but things have changed over the years for those.
Don't forget about Station 3. That is-
Yeah.
God forbid.
We got three already written down here.
Anybody? Okay, next.
Okay, just real quick, I heard, or I was asked by the city manager that you had some questions about our emergency preparedness division. So I just wanted to bring you up on a few things just real quick to talk about what our EP division actually does. EP, emergency preparedness, is actually underneath the fire department. Basically, I gave you this nice little technical answer to what the EP does, but really what you need to know about emergency preparedness is they're a department that has a 30,000 foot view. In other words, everything that they're looking at is from way up. They're looking at the city as a whole and things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to disaster operations or disasters that occur in the city. So a lot of their planning, a lot of the things that they put in place are all about that. They're all about that high level understanding of what needs to be done in the city. Some of the things that our EP department does currently, and these are just highlights of some of those things. If you want to look at some statistical stuff, you know, the annual report that I put there kind of talks about some of the things EP does, but basically they look at citywide planning for emergencies, disasters, things of that nature. They're responsible for the coordination of the local emergency operations plan. In other words, that's probably one of the most important documents that the city holds when it comes to disaster planning, because that's what we've told the citizens, the state, the federal government, how we're going to operate in a disaster, a major disaster. So they're responsible for making sure that that plan is put together, updated constantly, and available for use when those disasters occur. They do a lot of coordination with volunteer agencies. Just like all the departments have some types of volunteers, they have some that are specific to the disaster operations. We have the CERT team, which is the Citizens Emergency Response Team, all volunteers. We have the DART team, which is the Disaster Animal Response Team. Again, all volunteers that handle this type of stuff. And then we actually have our Emergency Operations Center volunteers. Whenever that Operations Center opens up and there's even the hint that a disaster is on its way, whether it's weather, which there's probably 3 or 4 people down there tonight, somewhere in that area, volunteers, they're watching the weather because there's that potential. They're there anytime that potential is coming up. So they're staffed and they're looking at those things. Our EP also looks at emergency planning training for the community. They do that CERT training, the DART training, different types of community types of disaster response training. They're the weather ready. In other words, they're the ones that are going to provide that notification of storm sirens and when those kinds of things need to be set off. Because they're watching that weather, they're watching the things that are going on constantly. They help administer that LEOP. In other words, that emergency plan when it comes time for the real disaster, they don't take over, they just make sure we're following the LEOP. What we'll talk about here in a minute is who really needs to take over in that situation. They do a lot of City of Independence training and drills on the LEOP as well. And they handle a lot of the coordination when it comes to the state and federal resources that we get as part of disasters and things of that nature. So just briefly on the LEOP, what that's about. Basically, that's the planning document that we utilize as our principal source to coordinate all of those resources that are available to us to protect our citizens in those disasters. It directs the mayor, the council, and the city management in disaster operations. In other words, those steps that need to be taken place in a disaster operation, because it's critical in a lot of ways. One, to make sure we do the right thing, which is the most important thing for our citizens. But two, also if it's something that we're looking at when it comes to funding or reimbursement, remediation or mitigation from state or federal resources. If we're not following that, we could actually have that potential to lose some of those things. It also meets the state and federal requirements and regulations for disaster preparedness. And it meets our requirements under NIMS, which is the National Incident Management System. It tells us that we're going to follow the right chain of command. Now, again, one of the first documents that you'll find in that document or in that LEOP, which you should find in the council office and mayor's office and city manager's office as well, is that it basically directs what you as council members or what the mayor would have responsibilities for in an emergency disaster situation. Some other things that are part of that are the different sections. And this is probably where that discussion came from the other night in a study session, is these other sections, or annexes as they're called, are the specific department related operations that each department in the city has to consider. So really, even though the EP department has that overview of everything, every department in the city has their own little section of things they have to handle inside an emergency. So they have, every department has designated someone that is the LEOP person, the person that's responsible for knowing things in that particular area. Just an overview of the different sections. Obviously, you'll see direction and control, which is the main section that would involve you as council members. Communications, public information, damage assessment, law enforcement, fire and rescue, so on and so forth. And as you can see, there's several sections that are a part of that. All of those are contentions and plans for what needs to happen in the case of a major disaster inside the city. So essentially, that's what we wanted you to know, is that's probably the critical thing that as council members you need to know, is the true primary source of that EP. But it goes way beyond that, and the things that they do underneath to prepare those. Just lastly, just kind of, I kind of touched on this. Again, as the mayor, elected officials, your primary responsibility is to help us declare that disaster and make sure that we can get that disaster declaration to the governor through SEMA. And then the mayor and council members serve on what's called a policy group through the EOC or through the LEOP that help us make those decisions as the city directors of what we can do to move forward in a disaster, because the situations that occur in a disaster are not the same as daily operations. There's decisions that have to be made that go way beyond just the daily types of situations. So essentially that's what I wanted to touch on, but I'm open to any questions on EP as well.
I appreciate it. I was pretty amazed when our parks director was talking about all the emergency preparedness that he does. So I appreciate you enlightening us on
Right.
what some of the other responsibilities are in the city.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has the roles that are inside the city. So some have larger roles, some have smaller, but everybody has a role in that disaster preparedness aspect.
Thank you. One of the things that I have talked to several about in the past several years as far as emergency preparedness, and I honestly don't know what the plan says at this point. I don't know if it's changed. But one of my main concerns was water supply. And who knows what kind of disaster could interrupt life as we know it in Independence. But if it did, and it did for any length of time, the most important resource is water. We can go without electricity for a while. We can go without electricity for a long time, but you can't go without water. And our water system is not in the city limits of Independence. It's not on IPL. So we don't have total control, that number one, and that's That's the number one concern. It's on Kansas City Power and Light, and that's not anything against them. It's just that we don't have any control, and we have very limited, I think, backup power to charge the system. And so my concern, and what I have talked to several about in the past, is as emergency preparedness for the city, I think furnishing water to 250,000 people in eastern Jackson County is probably one of the most important things that we need to be prepared for, and I don't think we are at this point. And so my suggestion was, and in talking to several people, there were several suggestions, and I'm not necessarily tied to any one of them, but one of the suggestions that made a lot of sense was to maybe seek some federal funds and to have a couple semi-trucks with huge generators on it that could be moved out there to charge the system. In other words, electrify the pumps and pump water to the water towers. Probably it would be easier to pump water out of the water towers and have distribution that way as well. But if we could charge the entire system, because it's not just for Independence, and we have to understand that it is important for Independence, but it's also important for all the rest of Jackson County, because 250,000. So I think down the road, I mean, I would like to hear some more discussion on the preparedness for a major emergency for our water source, our water department, and maybe even have some sort of a mobile couple semis that we possibly could get funded through the federal government, that we could move either out there, or we could move to a water tower, or wherever we needed to. It would be a mobile way to charge the system, dispense water, and even move it out to Blue Springs or Lee Summit or Green Valley, whoever needed it, if we were not able to charge the system. But the other thing is, are we prepared if there was a problem with the pumps? And that's a whole nother issue. Thank you.
Well, if you don't mind, can I just address one quick thing?
Yeah.
Is that we are looking at that. That is, while the LEOP addresses how we're going to take care of our citizens, we have started a process through our EP division with all of the divisions in the city on doing what's called continuing operation plans.
Yes.
In other words, how do we continue our operation? So we're working to put just those things that you're talking about together, so that if something affects one of our operations, how can we bring the city back up to do what we do? And
Right,
that's a
down
part of
there
it.
at Water Pollution Control down at Rock Creek, Kansas City feeds that also. We're the backup down there. Our lines end up here at the Twin Drive-In. We could actually put a feed from Twin in there for a backup, for an alternate
If
feed.
they'd let us.
Well, just takes a little politicking.
Yeah, if I could add, if I could add to that, what the chief said there, yes, we, preliminary to our discussions with the fire department about that, we've done a little pre-planning with utilities to talk about some of these very issues. And so even just 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion about some of these very ideas. There's redundant power supply at the water plant, but your ideas were some of the ones kicked around. And, you know, we realized, as you do, that water is essential to maintaining continuing operations of a community, and sewer is also essential. And we were doing some work to identify the lift stations, for example, that do not have backup generators and that sort of thing. So we are doing that, so your point's well taken, and we will be working on those very issues, and it's part of our preparations for meeting with the fire department and trying to incorporate in that plan.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, since we deliver water to quite a few citizens of Jackson County, could this be something that we look at? Does Mark have an arm of their regional preparedness area to where we can use them to maybe acquire some funding?
Well, I can tell you probably in the resources that when it comes to generation and things of that nature, that's one of the jobs that EP has, is that when they need that resource, they have the capability to know exactly who to go to in the state or federal government to get it here fast. And as you know, there are lots of surplus government things that are around because of that. People order that stuff up. The government usually doesn't keep it in stock, so they're always ready to provide you brand new stuff in those situations. So it is an available resource that we know is out there and happens pretty quick. no situation. Just one last thing, if I could. Saturday, we're having our parade celebrating our 175th anniversary. It'll go from Truman Library up around the square, so we invite everyone to attend, and we'd be glad to have everyone up there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if I could do without good air conditioning, but no, along the lines of everything has been supplied, and it has been, and when it's down, it comes back up really fast. And appreciate all your work. Thank you.
Well, I don't do that, but our friends at IPL and Water Department do a great job. Thank you.
Thanks.
And our final presentation is the Police Department transition from UCR crime reporting to NIBRS reporting. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. We'd like to ask Deputy Chief Darnigan to come up to make a presentation. He's going to explain what the difference between the two reporting systems are and the reason for making this change.
Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council, thank you for having me here. Ken Jarnigan, Deputy Chief with the Police Department. And I'll take just a few minutes to explain what we're going to be doing here starting the end of the month. The Police Department currently utilizes the Uniform Crime reporting system. Many police departments around the nation use that as well. At the end of this month, we will start the transition in what's called the National Incident-Based Reporting System. This is a push that's been going on by the FBI for numerous years. They have a target date for every law enforcement department in the country to be transitioned to this by 2021. UCR was created in 1929. And I'll explain some of the differences here between the two systems. The UCR is a statistical crime reporting tool that's designed to describe increases and decreases in reportable crime on a national level, but not necessarily the local jurisdictional level. UCR is designed as a trend data to measure crime in America and only report certain crimes. This is why departments also track statute-based crime statistics, which provide actual numbers of crimes in respective cities. This is why every year we have a difference in crime stats between our police records unit and our crime analyst. It's because our records unit, they're collecting data to report UCR. Our crime analysts are looking at data for crime trends. So that's why we always have that difference there between the two, between our two departments. The UCR utilizes a hierarchy method in which only the highest ranking crime is counted. An example of that, let's say a homeowner comes home and finds that their home is being burglarized. There's a confrontation with the burglar kills the homeowner, and then escapes in the homeowner's car. We have actually 3 crimes. What we would report under UCR would be just the murder. So the burglary and the auto theft would not be reported to the FBI. We would just report the homicide. So that kind of gives you an indication of the hierarchy method, and that's how UCR classifies as crime stats. The National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS, is an incident-based reporting system that collects data on each single crime as compared to the most serious crime in the hierarchy model within the UCR. NIBRS data goes much deeper than UCR, as it includes all offenses with a single incident and additional aspects such as location, time of the day, and whether the incident was cleared or not. NIBRS will improve the detail and overall quality of crime data, which will help law enforcement and communities around the country use resources more strategically and effectively. This national transition to NIBRS is endorsed by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Major Cities Chiefs Association, Major County Sheriffs Association, and the National Sheriffs Association. There's a 4-step process that our records unit will be beginning, like I said, the end of this month. The FBI comes and does an evaluation and basically scores our records unit or our department at the end of the year. The 4 categories are system appropriateness, updated capability and responsiveness, error rate, and statistical reasonableness. If we satisfy all of these 4 criteria, then at the end of the year, we will be certified as a NIBRS reporting agency. So one of the big questions is, what does this do to are what do our crime rates look like after a transition to NIBRs. A lot of people have the perception that it may make our crime rates increase. There was a study in 2000, the year 2000, by the Bureau of Justice Statistics report regarding the NIBR rates compared to UCR rates. And what they found were that murder rates stay the same. Rape, robbery, and aggravated assaults in NIBRs are about 1% higher on average than in the UCR. NIBR's burglary rates are lower by an average of 0.5%. And NIBR's larceny rates, which is theft, are higher by an average of 3.4%. And then motor vehicle theft rates higher at an average of 4.5%. So you see in some of the property crimes, you're going to see a slight increase. As far as violent crimes, they should stay close to the same as what we're seeing now with UCR. And that is really a basic flyover of our transition to NIBRs. So any questions at all over what we're going to be doing?
Does our computer system now, do we have to get any advanced upgrade to anything
Yes.
for you guys?
Yep, that'll be an increase in that, right? Because right now, our officers, when they take a report, all of their classification codes are all based on UCR. So we've begun that transition, and that's why we're jumping on this now, because St. Joe, Independence, and Jefferson City, we all use the same New World or Tyler product. And so St. Joe has just completed that process. So it's more cost effective for us now to jump on board because Tyler has already done a lot of the legwork with St. Joe. So that's why we're jumping on it now rather than wait to 2021.
So when will this be fully implemented?
We're hoping by the end of the year we'll have NIBRs up and going. We should be certified by the end of the year, and we should be ready to go. I'm not sure the target date as far as New World having that completed, but we will be certified by the end of the year. We're still working with our vendor to get a date as to when we'll be ready at that point.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So is this primarily a data processing?
Yeah, that's how we will be tracking our crime rates.
Okay,
So
you can get the information from the FBI.
right, what FBI will be reporting right now, what they're reporting, it's showing a national crime trend rather than like local jurisdictional type crime trends.
Okay, so we're giving them stats
Right.
for national crime.
Right.
So, and I don't mean to be a CIS.
Right.
But suppose we had something here that we wanted to see if there was a like thing somewhere else in the crime. Could we use that?
Yes, it would probably, this would allow us, in my opinion, it would allow us to be, it would give us a more realistic report as to what we're getting right now.
And, okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
If we might just take a minute here.
I'm sorry. What were you saying?
Can I?
Well, you're gonna do it?
Yeah, I'll do it. She left her notes.
Next is a staff report for council interview committee discussion. Councilman Roberson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Karen had to leave, but she spoke just briefly to me before she left, and she left a few notes. And basically, we just wanted to reiterate and make sure that the council's still in consensus on the way that we're going to do appointments and interviews. Because I think at one time we were doing interviews with an interview committee. This is now a revolving committee, so there's 3 on it right now. It's Van Camp, myself, and DeLucy. But we'll rotate off in another month or 2. And so for 2 or 3 months, each of you will be on that interview committee. We'll take turns. And then when there's vacancies on some of the councils and commissions, anybody that's applied, you'll decide who you want to interview with the city clerk, set up those interviews, and then bring a recommendation to the council. So that's how we had decided to do it before. And also, we had never talked about how long we would hold the applications. I think at one time we had discussed holding them, and this was the recommendation from Karen and from the mayor, because she had talked to Eileen. She didn't talk to me about it, but Eileen and Karen talked about it, and they had recommended holding the applications for 1 year. And then if a opening comes up, then those applications could be brought back. Otherwise, a person that applies for a committee or a commission would have to reapply the next year. That's up for grabs. We could change it to 2 years, whatever you all want to do. And also the suggestion was that we probably don't want the same person serving on multiple boards. That would allow more people to serve. So any concerns with that, or any suggestions to tweak that or change that? That's all.
Well, those
So
are
it's-
certainly good ideas.
And recommendations, but I feel that, you know, the mayor and Councilman DeLucia ought to be here under these. I mean, I'm looking at 6 months for holding, but that doesn't mean, so I'd postpone it, you know, recommendations till we have further study.
Okay, well, this is how it was set up before by the council, except for
Well, we had-
except for the 1 year, so.
Okay, yeah, so
So-
I'll put it off till we have more council and interjection.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, we're done.